Good evening, friends. This is Dr. Aishvarya Kaushik. I hope all of you are doing well. Now, we are starting with our dental materials sessions. I am your dental materials, endodontics, and conservative dentistry faculty. Um, Now, these sessions are coming at a very tricky time for those of us who've already attempted the papers. We are in the fresh backdrop of the results and the exam of our INI 2025 May and also the NEET 2025 that happened in April only, right? So, um, very less gap was there in between these two exams. And these days, the results also come very fast, especially the INI. So, first of all, of course, congratulations to those who've done well. For those who've been trying and studying diligently, despite that not being able to get their desired rank, well, that's life. That's how it goes. We win some, we lose some, and we keep trying hard, isn't it? We keep believing in the process, and we keep trying hard, right, guys? Also, I understand that this being the first session apart from our very own students. This is also being transmitted, and uh, it's like a direct to home kind of this thing, free class for practically everyone. So welcome everyone to the DBMCI MDS platform. Um, well, the idea of taking these sessions is twofold. First, we do our theory part in pretty much good detail, but at the same time, we do not restrict ourselves to what is written in the book. We make an attempt that during your sessions we simultaneously keep track of practically all the possible MCQs that can come, and more importantly, the MCQs that have come as recently as the last month's INI and the previous month's and the last month's NEET exam. That is how the content is created and delivered to you. Um, well, we call this diagnostics part, isn't it? How much of what we tell you as part of our lecture has got the strike rate or the direct correlation with the MCQs that are coming and those which will be coming, right? That is a challenge for us, and that's what we do, right, guys? So let's start with the very first chapter of dental materials. Very important, forms the background of practically the entire dental materials syllabus, as well as a lot of operative dentistry, as well as a lot of orthodontics, prosthodontics. So just like pharmacology is to our medicine colleagues, I think dental materials is to us dental surgeons. The first chapter that we're starting here is physical, mechanical, chemical properties. So in short, it's the properties of dental materials that we are starting. We'll try and correlate, and instead of going in a very linear manner in which you will feel that everything has to be memorized and mugged up, we'll try to correlate everything and try to understand things. So we start with our concept, the very basic concept of stress and strain, and we build up our chapter starting from that. Now, if you go by the definition, what is stress? It's the reaction or the internal force that is equal and opposite to an external force. So if this is my test specimen and I apply an external force, whether compressive, whether tensile, whether flexure, whether shear, irrespective of that, the body will try to, react to it and prevent, that's inertia, and prevent its deformation, right? Now, that's the definition, right? And what is the mathematical value? It is nothing but force divided by the area. So if you remember your physics from your school time, it's basically pressure, right? So stress is nothing but pressure. And as far as, if you just leave aside the definition, it's basically your external force that you're subjecting your body to. Of course, it's going to react, and that's part of the definition. But what we are interested in is what all deformations that are taking place when you apply an external force, right? And that leads to what is known as strain. So strain is nothing but change in dimension divided by the original dimension, right? So if you are applying a tensile force, what is a tensile force? Which is trying to stretch the material. So if this is a wire and we are applying a tensile force trying to stretch the material in the two directions, then this material, after a certain point of time, once you achieve some atomic separation between the atoms, it's going to deform. Now that change or increase, when you apply a tensile force, it's an increase in length. If you apply a compressive force, and obviously subsequently if you divide it by the area, that's the stress or the pressure, then that is compression. So that's decrease in length. So anyways, whether increase or decrease, a change in length divided by the original length would give you strain. So you apply an external force, you deform a material, and on the x and y axes you plot the stress versus strain graph, and you derive various concepts. And from there, the examiner picks up various questions and gives them to you. One of the very favorite questions, both from I&I perspective as well as NEET perspective. So let's see all of that. So when you say a stress strain curve, stress is on the y-axis, strain is on the x-axis. Now, this is not a norm. When you say a time temperature cooling curve, as we will discuss with, say, dental waxes or solid solutions, or in the chapter of equilibrium phases of casting alloys, when we discuss our metallurgy in the subsequent class, you will realize, and I'm going to obviously rub this right now because I don't want you to be confused, but the time temperature cooling curve of a dental wax or of a pure metal is something like time is plotted on the x-axis and temperature is plotted on the y-axis. My only point of telling you this is, do not try to memorize the fact that if you say stress strain curve, then the first thing that you say always comes on the y-axis, and when you say strain, the second term, that always comes on the x-axis. That's not a generalization. All right. So you start plotting a graph, and as you increase your value of stress, say from now this is not, I'm not going into the specific values, I'm just telling you the basic concept. So if the stress here is in, say, force per unit area, so that's Newton per meter square, so that's Pascal or megapascal or gigapascal, that depends on the amount of force. So for example, let's just very, very much simplify this and say megapascal, right? So let's write 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now, as you keep on increasing the stress, the strain keeps on increasing, right? Now here, there can be two different materials. One material in which you have to apply a lot of stress, a lot of external force for it to be deformed, versus a material in which you apply relatively less amount of stress for it to be deformed by the same amount or the same value, right? So for example, if I have a very, very ductile material, what is ductility? The ability to be able to stretch, right? And even before the plastic deformation, you have the elastic deformation, right? Or for an orthodontic wire, the ability to deflect. So if I'm bending under a flexural external force or stress, if I'm applying lesser amount of force, right, and I get deformation versus a material in which I have to apply a lot of very high amount of force, external force or external stress per unit area, for the material to deform, say for example, by the same amount. If you have to compare any two materials, you always keep one thing constant, isn't it? So in order to understand this physically with the help of a graph, say this is material A, this is material B, right? Now I want it to deform, both the materials to deform, right? Say till at this level. So strain is at this level, right? Say 1 unit change. Say the original length of the wire was say 10 centimeter, and I want to stretch it by 1 centimeter, right? Reversibly. Now for this, if you see the amount of external force per unit area that I have to apply for material A is this much, which is just about less than 1. But for the same amount of deformation, the amount of external force that I have to apply is almost double, right? It's almost just about 1.8. So somewhere 0.9 for the same amount of stretching for material A versus say 1.8 megapascal for the same amount of stretching of material B. So what does this mean? This means that material B is more rigid than material A. It's more rigid, it's resisting, it's stiff. It's resisting my external force and it does not want to deform, right? So this stress upon strain value is known as modulus of elasticity. So you have to apply more stress for the same amount of strain. That means stress upon strain value is higher for material B than material A, right? So stress, so what are our conclusions from here? First, Young's modulus or modulus of elasticity or the measure, this is not the mathematical value, but measure of rigidity or stiffness is equal to the slope of the straight line portion. Now this is very important. We are dealing with everything that is in the reversible zone when we talk of modulus of elasticity. When we move into the plastic deformation zone, we do not define this value, right? So slope of the straight line portion, straight line portion of the stress strain curve. And just in short, to remember, if you don't want to remember that entire line, just for simplification, simply the slope of the stress strain curve. And it is deemed understood that we are restricting ourselves to the straight line portion of the graph. The slope of the stress strain curve is simply the modulus of elasticity. Now this chapter is very much interlinked with the chapter of wrought alloys. Again, it's a separate chapter. We'll be discussing that in subsequent classes. But because, as I said, diagnostics for us is very important at DBMCI MDS, what I'm teaching has to have some relevance with the MCQs that are coming. So there was a question in NEET April 2025, which of the following has got the lowest value of modulus of elasticity or stiffness, right? And the options were between, martensitic NiTi, beta titanium or titanium molybdenum alloy. This also overlaps with ortho, but it's a hardcore Rotaloys, the straight pick from the chapter of Rotaloys of Phillips. So that's why I always cover this. So saying a big hi to Dr. Kunal, also our colleague for orthodontics. Please feel free to discuss this with our students, revise this with our students when you're taking your ortho also. But as part of Phillips also and as part of DM also, I also do this. And then you have what? Stainless steel, and we have alloy. These are the classical materials that you use for the manufacture of various types of orthodontic wires. And when you see the value of modulus of elasticity of all these four, now I'm not going to confuse you, bombard you with too much data here, but just as a technique, this is how you're supposed to study. When you see, you guys, you are not in second year BDS right now. You're all interns, right? Even if you are second year BDS, always try to correlate and study. So don't think that you're just reading physical and mechanical properties right now, especially the interns. I can still understand for second year undergraduates. They won't understand a word. But if you're an intern or a post intern and preparing, that means you have a basic knowledge of your entire dental materials curriculum, isn't it? So guys, please do not hesitate to jump around from chapter to chapter, trying to create a web in your head and correlating and studying. So out of all these four, the modulus of elasticity is minimum for NiTi. What does this basically mean? That my curve for NiTi out of all these four would be the flattest. The steepest would have the highest slope. Highest slope means the stress divided by the strain value would be highest, right? So if I'm to plot, this becomes, say, for example, C, and this becomes, say, for example, D. So another, image-based question can be, out of these four, NiTi, alloy, stainless steel, and titanium molybdenum alloy, which graph represents NiTi? So the one which is having the flattest slope would be NiTi, because that has got the lowest modulus of elasticity or the least stiffness or the least rigidity. So C represents NiTi, right? And just to confuse you guys, what the examiner said, he just simply mentioned M NiTi. M NiTi is nothing but, martensitic NiTi. Whether it's martensitic or austenitic, it's basically NiTi only, right? So the answer was M NiTi. So that is how we teach, and that is how we're supposed to study, especially revise. For those of you who feel that this is the first time, despite them being intern, despite some of you, I can understand, in college, probably in second year, you had less of Phillips and you consumed less of Phillips and consumed more of beer and cigarettes, but that's okay. That happens in college life, that's okay, that's understood. But now is the time to really buck up and get your game going, guys. All right. Now next up, now this was the straight line portion. Next, what all is important from this graph? I'm going to make this graph again for you. The stress strain curve. So we're just taking, for the concept part, we're taking this one graph for one particular material. Now there comes a time where whatever deformation that has taken place Up to a certain point, it's all elastic. Now, what do we mean by elastic deformation versus plastic deformation? Now, if I'm applying an external force, but I've not created too much separation or I've not given too much trauma to the atoms of the specimen, that I've broken the bonds. No, I've not yet broken the bonds. So when I remove the force, we remove the external force, this test specimen comes back to its original dimension. That value of stress is known as the proportional limit, right? That value of stress is known as the proportional limit. And just to confuse you, which I have to because this question was asked in the exam, so I cannot help it. This value is very close to what is known as the elastic limit. This value is very close to what is known as the elastic limit. Used interchangeably. Why do I say that I have to confuse you here? It's fine. Many of us know that, the proportional limit, elastic limit, more or less the same. There are a couple of very minor differences. In general, the value of elastic limit is slightly more than that of proportional limit. I don't know why Phillips says this, and we have to follow this because this is where the examiner can exploit the straight line from Phillips and can give us a question about which we won't be having any answer. So in general, how I remember this is that when I write proportional limit, it's a longer term, isn't it? It consists of more letters and alphabets, proportional limit, as compared to elastic limit. So the opposite is true. The value of elastic limit is slightly higher than the value of proportional limit. So that's your MCQ, right? This kind of thing has been asked before, but about 4-5 years back, not in the last 3 years. Then the definition, again, very, very similar, but then as you know, what is written in Phillips, we have to follow that. So proportional limit is that value of stress beyond which if you apply an external pressure or external stress, the stress is no longer proportional to the strain. So that value of stress beyond which if you apply a stress is no longer proportional to strain. Again, I have picked this up from the latest Phillips just in case the examiner gives you this definition specifically, and in the options gives you both proportional limit and elastic limit. So you should know this. Again, a slight controversy is there because in the older edition of Phillips, 11th edition and 12th edition, there's a slight discrepancy. I'm going with the latest edition. Even in the 13th edition, this kind of language is used, so I'm taking a chance with that. Then what is the language that we use to define elastic limit? Elastic limit is what Phillips says is that the greatest value of stress up to which if you remove that external pressure or external stress, the material comes back to its original dimension, right? Again, a couple of versions are there, but this is one version of the definition which is there in your 12th and 13th edition of Phillips, so I'm following that. So the greatest value of stress that once you remove it, the test specimen or simply the material comes back to its original dimension, right? So no harm in remembering these two definitions. Hopefully the examiner is not sadistic enough. I think this has happened about 5 years back that this kind of a question came in which they actually gave a definition which is actually true for both. but they try to exploit this minor, interplay in language and words as given in the textbook and try to create a problem there. But so anyways, that can happen, should not happen. Not been happening in the past 3 years as far as this question is concerned. So I'm hopeful that this kind of question is not repeated. Right, guys? So now this is the straight line portion. Right? Now, before moving on to the non-straight line, non-linear portion, what other things do we realize from this graph? When you apply, an external force and the material kind of whether compresses or extends or flexes, whatever happens depending on the force, there is some amount of energy that is stored in the material. Right? Now, this energy that is stored in the material, which of course will be completely recovered when the external force is removed, is known as resilience, and it is determined by the area under the straight line portion of the stress strain curve. So the slope of the stress strain curve is your Young's modulus, or the modulus of elasticity, or a measure of rigidity. The area under the straight line portion of the stress strain curve, or the area of the stress strain curve till the proportional limit or till the elastic limit, is known as resilience. So that's another MCQ, which I'm not going to write in as many words. I'm speaking very slowly, so I hope you guys followed me. That's the MCQ. And the area under the stress strain curve in the straight line portion. Right? Now, moving beyond this. Now you keep on applying an external force. So what happens is that beyond the proportional limit or the elastic limit, the material starts to get in the non-linear zone. Right? So the graph is no longer straight. And the material starts to bend or gets compressed or gets elongated irreversibly. So when you remove that external force, the entire deformation, only the part of deformation is recovered, the entire deformation is not recovered. So that means the material is left permanently deformed until the material fails. And it will fail at some value, and that value at which the material fails, by failing I mean it fractures, is known as the ultimate strength. Is known as the ultimate strength. Right? Now, whatever irreversible deformation or plastic deformation has taken place is how much? It's if you make a 90-degree drop to your x-axis here at the level of the proportional limit, and make a 90-degree drop to the x-axis at the level of the ultimate strength, then this strain, which is irreversible, is known as, this is plastic deformation. Right? And this is under a tensile strain or tensile external force, tensile stress. This is a measure of ductility. So in other words, what is ductility, guys? Ductility is plastic or irreversible deformation under a tensile stress or force. So that's another MCQ. That's another MCQ. What are the various, next MCQ, what is the applied MCQ from ductility? The applied MCQ is, what are the various ways or methods of determining ductility. So imagine you have a wire and you're stretching it. You're stretching it, right? So what's going to happen? This wire is going to elongate in length and obviously gets compressed in the other two mutually perpendicular axes. So if I'm, say, elongating it along the z-axis, so obviously that means that along the x and the y-axis, it's going to get compressed, right? So what's going to happen? The wire is going to get thinner. So if you can mathematically determine the reduction in the cross-sectional area of this wire just right at the point of fracture, right at the point of ultimate tensile strength, that is one way in which you can compare the ductility of two materials, two or more materials. The smaller is the cross-sectional area, that means it's got elongated more, right? So the first method is reduction in cross-sectional area, right? The second method is, of course, in fact, this should have been the first method, but anyways, is the percentage elongation. So this is very simple. What is percentage elongation? Elongation, that is increase in length. Under a tensile force, there would be increase in length, right? So increase, that is change in length per unit original length as expressed in percentage multiplied by 100. So again, this is the most obvious and clear-cut comparison of ductility between any two materials. And third, very interestingly, is the cold bend test. What is the cold bend test? Cold bend test is very simple. Imagine there is a a very strong person, like a bouncer, right? Big muscles. So what they do is, in the gym, if you've seen, they take a big heavy rod, and when they have to compare their strength, they kind of cold bend it 90 degrees, right? So when you bend a straight wire like this 90 degrees, it doesn't fracture. That means it's pretty ductile because it's stretching on the outer curvature, right? There's a tensile force on the outer curvature, on the bigger radius, isn't it, on the outside? Then you again cold bend it by 90 degrees. Then you again cold bend it. So how many what do you mean by cold bending? You're not heating it. So obviously this is just a way of telling you there is no muscle man who's doing this. It's a engineering apparatus that you do in the lab. You clamp the two ends and you bend it 90 degrees, right? Now you'll say, sir, but then this is flexion. Guys, in physics, ultimately everything is a combination, right? Because there is no pure force. So even in flexion, on the outer curvature, there is tensile force. There's an extension of the wire or the test specimen, right? So the number of cold bend tests that a material can sustain before fracture is a measure of its ductility. So if a material fractures at 5 bends versus a material that fractures at 7 bends, so that means material that fractures at 7 bends has got a greater ductility than the material that is fracturing at 5 bends. Understood? So these 3 tests understood. Now the MCQs. The MCQ that was asked 3 years back was, all of the following are tests of ductility except. So you have to remember these 3. Very commonsensical. See, I'm not referring to any textbook. I just remember them. Of course, I've read them a few times, but very commonsensical. These are the questions in which you, again, imagine you're in the examination, right? And the question is same, right? All of the following are tests of ductility except. Now I'm giving you a very generic option A, option B, option C, option D. I'm giving you a very generic kind of a strategy, right? The one who won't be able to qualify the exam one who will get a very bad rank, first of all, would not have read this, right? They would be doing guesswork by directly going onto the options and seeing, right? The other person will get a okay rank, right? But not the rank of, but not the dream rank. What will be that person's approach? Oh, I've read this, I've memorized this. But the moment he sees the question, he'll go to the options. She or he will go to the options. And the examiner is there to confuse you. The one who's going to get a top 100 rank in NEET, All India NEET, is the one who's not going to see the options. All of the following are tests of ductility except. And he raises his eyes above the screen or sideways, doesn't see the options. And in your head, first of all, you tell yourself what are the tests of ductility. And then you see the options. That is a short way of not doing a negative mark, of not getting a negative mark. Understand? So that's the approach. Of course, there will be a few questions in which you cannot get to the answer without seeing the options. And that you have to do, but always remember, see the question, rotate the theory in your head, and try to have a crystal clear picture of what the possible answers might be or what the answer is, and then see the options. Right. So anyways, that is one question that has been asked. Very high probability it will be asked again. And again, I'm correlating this to the Rotterdam's chapter with this saying that when I do Rotterdam's, I'm going to revise this again. But because this has got direct correlation with this chapter, I'm going to tell you an MCQ which comes in this sense, that which of the following has got the highest ductility or the lowest ductility, right? Again, the options are the same: beta titanium or titanium molybdenum alloy, LG alloy, stainless steel, and your NiTi, right, guys? And so let's see this, guys. So this is the master table of your Rotterdam's chapter. And if you see this, cobalt, chromium, nickel is actually what? LG alloy. Stainless steel is SS, NiTi is NiTi, beta titanium is basically TMA, titanium molybdenum alloy, synonymous with beta titanium. I'm going to go into the details when we do Rotterdam's, but because this has got direct relevance to this topic of ductility. Now see the last column here. Number of 90-degree cold bends without fracture. Highest is with 8. So that means this is the most ductile. What is this? LG alloy or cobalt, chromium, nickel. Which is the lowest? NiTi. So this is the least ductile. So NiTi is the least ductile. LG alloy is the most ductile. Right? Coming back, what is the other way in which the examiner can rotate this concept and try to confuse you? Let's see this. Similar to this concept of ductility, or rather the exact opposite, is brittleness. The inability of plastic deformation is brittle. So when you say plastic deformation, the lowest value of plastic deformation is equal to the highest brittleness. So the inability of a material to sustain or undergo plastic deformation is brittleness. So in other words, when you talk of those four, which has got the highest ductility out of these four? And this is not highest ductility amongst the various, silver, copper, gold. Please don't get confused. Why am I telling you? Why am I going back to that ortho, wires time and again? The MCQs are asked from there only. You understand? So the examiner is not asking you ductility, the value of ductility between aluminium versus silver versus gold versus copper. Gone are those times. That was 15, 20 years back. Nowadays, the examiner is correlating clinical stuff with theory. A direct question will be asked, either it would be hardcore concept, graph would be there, ask you. Otherwise, it would be correlated to clinical, right? So highest ductility amongst titanium, molybdenum alloy, niti, LG alloy, and SS is LG alloy. In other words, lowest brittleness. And niti has got lowest ductility. In other words, highest brittleness amongst the four. Yes? All right. So this takes care of these questions. I'll quickly make this again and we'll quickly revise what we've done till now and then we'll build on to this. So we were discussing, just for your perspective, the stress strain curve. I'm going to make this, keep this neat. Straight line portion ends at the proportional limit or elastic limit, and then ultimately it fractures at the value of ultimate strength. This is proportional limit, right? Till here we were talking of resilience. The strain between the elastic limit or the proportional limit and the ultimate strength is plastic deformation or the measure of ductility, right? This is what we've discussed. Now, next concept. Of course, the material is beyond the proportional limit, the material is getting plastically deformed and ultimately it fractures. Now, till such time the material fractures, you are giving it energy, right? The total energy. One was the energy till the proportional limit, which will be completely recovered. That was resilience. But beyond resilience, right, beyond the elastic limit and till the ultimate strength, what is this value of energy that is stored? This is known as formability. This is known as formability, right? Obviously, the material has energy, isn't it? Till it has ultimately broken or fractured, right? And what is the total energy? Resilience plus formability, that's toughness. So the total energy under the stress strain graph, total energy, right? This is the proportional limit, this is the ultimate strength, and I'm going to plot this, make a dotted line here, and I'm going to this is toughness. That's the MCQ. Simple definition. The total energy under the stress strain curve. Now, next MCQ. That's a simple MCQ. If you remember the concept, you're fine. The other MCQ you have to memorize. And what is that? Toughness depends on various factors, but the two most important. Greater is the ultimate strength and greater is the plastic deformation, the ductility. Greater is the value of toughness. Let's understand this, guys. Obviously, ultimate strength value of this graph, say for example, is, this is material B, this is material A. So material B's value of ultimate strength is less than material A, right? The material B's value of ultimate strength is this much, whereas the value of ultimate strength of material A is this much. So material B's value of ultimate strength is less. As you can see, the area under B is lesser than the total area under material A. So the value of toughness of a material with lesser value of ultimate strength is lesser. The other variable is the plastic deformation. Again, that has got relevance to the value of toughness. How? Stress strain graph. Material A, finished, fractured at the level of proportional limit. Classic ceramic, highly brittle material, does not undergo, like glass. You throw it on the floor, it fractures. Doesn't deform, right? So what is the area under this material which is highly brittle, which is practically zero, or say for example its brother or sister who's got very less value of plastic deformation? What is the value of toughness? This much, the entire area. Or another material very similar to this, say for example material B very similar to this, but very less value of plastic deformation, isn't it? Very less value of plastic deformation. So what will be the total area under this graph? Something like this, right? As compared with another material, the value of plastic deformation is very high, right? And obviously, as I said, ultimate strength value is also very important. Both these values are important, right? So obviously, if your plastic deformation value is very high, your total area is pretty high, right? So the toughness is classically depending on two things: ultimate strength and plastic deformation or ductility. More is the ultimate strength, more is the ductility, more is the toughness, right? Dr. Dubey is saying Hindi mix-up. See, dear Dr. Ashish, the only thing is that we also have friends from down south. So when I start speaking Hindi, thoda Hindi bolna shuru karunga, then they say this, please speak in English. So that's the problem, right? Don't worry, dear Harshita, Aditi, don't worry. All these, concepts, the way I teach, all these concepts keep on getting repeated, and don't worry, right? Keep on repeating this. Everything would be crystal clear. All right. Yes. Now, Dr. Anushka, are you understanding? Now I've pretty much simplified this. Is it fine? Great. No, you're not supposed to learn. That I'll tell you. Rottalois, when we do Rottalois, now I'll tell you, there are a few values which you will have to kind of memorize, because then it becomes easier to remember. Just these four, isn't it? Stainless steel, alloy, titanium, molybdenum, and nitide. A few values you can remember, because that really helps you in solving the MCQs, isn't it? Right? Right. I know this is slightly tough, and it does take some time to understand. Right, guys? Okay. So where were we? We were discussing toughness, right? And then comes very much interlinked to this. Okay. So since one of you has said simplify, let us quickly. Yeah. So don't worry. We'll just very quickly in 10 seconds again get in perspective what we've done. Stress strain curve, हाँ बेटा, yes. More is ultimate strength in plastic deformation, more is toughness. Yes, true. So again, let's just get this in perspective. Stress strain curve, you're plotting this, you're applying an external force, the material is getting deformed, it gets deformed, it gets deformed up to a certain level, and that level is proportional limit till such time it gets only elastically or reversibly deformed. That means you remove the external force, the material comes back to its original dimension. Okay? Now then you have the zone of plastic deformation, and ultimately the material fractures. The slope of this stress strain curve, this is the slope, isn't it? Remember your physics, 11th class physics, the slope of the stress strain curve is your modulus of elasticity. The area under the straight line portion of the stress strain curve is resilience. The total area of the stress strain curve is toughness. The area under the plastic deformation zone is formability. So I hope you understand, this is formability, this is resilience, and resilience plus formability is toughness. Right? Now, next important point. There is this concept of what is known as impact strength. And yes, just to revise, we've done, this is plastic deformation, which is under a tensile force, is nothing but ductility, and we've done the 3 tests of ductility: the percentage elongation, the reduction in the cross-sectional area, and the cold bend test. And from the cold bend tests, we attempted that question in which we realized that alloy or cobalt chromium nickel has the ability to sustain maximum number of cold bends, so its ductility is maximum or its brittleness is lowest, right? And the night eye sustains the lowest number of cold bends and it fractures very soon. That means it is not able to sustain significant plastic deformation. That means its ductility is very low and it is highly brittle as compared to the rest 3. So as I said, I always say this, please don't think that alloy is the highest ductility, night eye is the lowest ductility. You understand? Obviously ceramic has got lower ductility than a night eye. Why am I repeatedly going back to that master table of those 4 types of wires that are used for fabrication of orthodontic wires? Is because the examiner correlates these 2 chapters and asks you questions. That's the idea, right? All right, so this is essentially what we've discussed till now. And then toughness, and we discussed the 2 parameters that determine toughness. They are ultimate strength, higher the value of ultimate strength, and ductility or plastic deformation. So higher the value of ultimate strength, higher the value of plastic deformation, higher the value of toughness. Next is impact strength. What is impact strength, guys? You have a stationary object which is being hit or impacted by a moving object, right? It's something like you're standing and a big ball which is oscillating like a pendulum hits your jaw or hits that object, right? So what's going to happen? Some of the energy is going to be stored in this material. This test specimen is going to be deformed. Up to a certain point, it's going to be elastically deformed. So all that energy is going to be stored inside it in the form of elastic energy or resilience, which will be released when the external force is gone. And obviously this material is extremely, it has low strength, very high brittleness, low plastic deformation. It can fracture also. So basically impact strength is a measure of the value of stress, external stress, that ultimately fractures a stationary object when impacted by a moving object. That's it. right? And what are the two tests? One is an IZOD, impact tester, and we don't have to go into the details of how this assembly is. This is done in a physics lab. We don't have to go into the detail. The only reason why I'm telling you this is that you can get a MCQ, Sharpie, and the other is CHARPY, Sharpie type impact tester, right? So Sharpie type apparatus and IZOD type apparatus are the two testing apparatus to determine the impact strength, right? That's one. Next, again, just like toughness, there are two very important variables which are going to determine the value of the impact strength. One is common with toughness, and that is ultimate strength. So that is a way of remembering. So higher the value of ultimate strength, higher is the value of impact strength, right? That's one thing. So this is similar to toughness. Higher is the value of ultimate strength, higher is the value of toughness, higher is the value of ultimate strength, higher is the value of impact strength, because ultimately you are checking whether when it is fracturing, right, under an impact. The other important thing is, and this is interesting, lower is the modulus of elasticity. Higher is the value of impact strength. Now, how do you understand this, guys? How do you understand this? See, for any two materials which have got, say, a similar value of ultimate strength, right? So this material, and you have another material. I'll make this with another color, and ultimate strength value is more or less similar, same, right? Now, modulus of elasticity, flatter slope is that of this material. Now, please remember, guys, if you remember your physics, simple maths, the flatter is the slope, the greater is the area of that triangle. So the area of this triangle, that means the resilience of this material A, is greater than, because this material area is this much. So the resilience of material A is greater than the resilience of material B. Understand? Now you will ask me, sir, then what is the significance in impact strength? Impact strength is very much dependent on the amount of energy that this material stores, because this material is impacted by a moving object. So the material which has the ability to sustain more amount of elastic deformation, the material which has the ability to sustain more amount of, to store more amount of energy, and that is the material which has got a lesser modulus of elasticity, because that material is going to have a greater area in the triangle, in the straight line portion of the stress strain curve. Suppose this has to be memorized, guys. This is the only way of kind of understanding it and trying to basically understand what Phillips says. This is how Phillips tells us, and this is how we're supposed to understand. Right, guys? So remember this for your MCQ purpose. Greater is the impact strength for those materials, those which have got greater value of ultimate strength. This is simple, because this is the point which is same with toughness, and lesser is the modulus of elasticity, because lesser is the modulus of elasticity, greater is the resilience, greater is the area, right? Because greater is the area of the triangle under the stress strain curve, right? Yes, beta, alloy is less brittle because it is more ductile. Ductility and brittleness are opposites. Ductility is the ability to stretch, or deform. Brittleness is the ability not to undergo plastic deformation, right? Yeah, slightly tough. I know this is for all of us. Yeah, we will get this. Slightly tough. All right. So again, what do? We quickly, because slightly tough for all of you, again get this thing in perspective and quickly revise this. Stress strain curve, straight line portion ends at the proportional limit. Whatever deformation has taken place till now is all reversible. This is known as elastic deformation. Beyond this, ultimately, material fractures at the ultimate strength, and whatever deformation that is taking place between the proportional limit and the ultimate strength is plastic deformation, which is, in simple English, measure of ductility of the material. And the materials which are not ductile are said to be brittle, right? The total area is known as toughness. The area in the plastic region is known as formability. The area in the elastic region is known as resilience. Greater is the toughness for those materials which have got greater value of ultimate strength and greater value of ductility. Greater is the value of impact strength for those materials which has got greater value of ultimate strength and lower value of Young's modulus. Is that clear, guys? Yes. The impact strength. Talking of impact strength, just remember impact strength. One MCQ that comes from impact strength is material which ultimately gets fractured. Which type of material? A stationary material hit by a moving object, like a pendulum. Also, sometimes when you enter a fight and you're standing and someone gives you a blow on your mandible and a mandible gets fractured, that's also an impact strength. Impact strength is dependent on ultimate strength. Higher is the ultimate strength, obviously higher will be the impact strength. Lesser is the modulus of elasticity, higher is the impact strength, because this material has the ability to kind of, before fracturing, kind of elastically deform to a greater extent and store all that energy. And once that blow goes, it's able to release that energy. It's like a shock absorber, right? Now, before I go to a very, very controversial MCQ, there's one more concept, and that is known as yield strength. Now, what is yield strength? Very close to the value of proportional limit or elastic limit, but in the plastic deformation zone. So how do you define it? So that value of external stress at which a given amount of plastic deformation has taken place, and that is about 0.1 to 0.2%. What do you mean by that? See, if this entire plastic deformation, this is the zone of plastic deformation, is say 100 meter, simple example, then the value of stress at which 0.1 or 0.2, that depends on the testing apparatus, you have to standardize it, and then you have to mention that my yield strength is so and so at 0.1% of the total amount of plastic deformation that the material undergoes. So if 100 units, 100 meter or 100 centimeter of permanent deformation takes place before this material fractures, then this value of 0.1 at 0.1 meter of plastic deformation, what is my value of stress? That value is known as yield strength. This is also known as aka is also known as proof stress. Now you'll ask me, sir, what is the significance? I mean, why do you need it? Because many a times what happens is that during testing conditions, you really don't know that point at which proportional limit finishes and plastic deformation starts. So you need to define it, right? You need to see that, okay, now this material has started behaving in the plastic zone. Now it's not coming back to its original dimension. So you define a preset, right? That, okay, 0.1% of the total amount of plastic deformation, what is that value of stress? That value of stress is known as yield strength. Yes, beta, decrease in model, exactly, decrease in modulus of elasticity. Flatter is the curve, more is the resilience. That means more is the energy that is stored under the impact force and greater is the impact strength. Yes. But flatter is the curve when you're comparing it with two materials which are having similar value of ultimate strength. Always remember, in physics and in dental materials, if you're comparing any two things, if you're comparing, say, a final value and it depends on two variables, then you have to keep one variable constant. Then only you will be able to know the effect of the other, of varying the other variable. Right? So yield strength, okay. So I'm repeating the yield strength for some of you. So I've taken this test specimen, started deforming it, and I reached my elastic limit or proportional limit. Now I'm entering the zone of plastic deformation, and ultimate strength is the value at which this material will fail. Right? Now there comes a value here, some very small percentage of the total amount of plastic deformation. The value of external stress, or the value of stress, or the pressure at which a predefined value, at which a predefined fraction of the total plastic deformation takes place, is known as yield strength. That value is kept at 0.1% classically kept at 0.1% to 0.2% of the total amount of plastic deformation that this material will undergo. And what is the total amount of plastic deformation that this material undergoes? Is this much. So 0.1 to 0.2% would be just like this. So just above, already made this actually. So just above the proportional limit, you get this value. Next important concept. Working range and spring back. What are these two things? Working range and spring back. Simple. You have a wire, orthodontic wire, and you deflect it, bend it. Now if I'm bending it till the proportional limit or the elastic limit, it will come back to its original dimension or its original position. Like I'm deflecting it, I'm not stretching it, I'm deflecting it. In ortho, you deflect it, right? When you engage the wires in your brackets, deflect it. When I remove the external force, it comes back. Now, when I'm doing this till the proportional limit or the elastic limit, that is known as the measure of working range. It's a measure of basically flexibility. The entire elastic deformation is recovered. Right. Now, what is spring back? Now imagine I deflect the wire just beyond the elastic limit, say somewhere in the till the yield strength. What happens? Does the wire not come back at all? Does the wire stay in that deformed position throughout? Like doesn't it recover even slightly? In reality, it recovers slightly. So even when you take your deformation in the plastic deformation zone, say till the yield strength. Why am I repeatedly mentioning the yield strength? Because in the definition of spring back, you deform it to the yield strength. So when I'm taking my wire, deflecting it to the yield strength, it does come back slightly, but not completely. So it recovers its elasticity slightly, but does not come back to its original position. So tries to come back, and that is known as spring back. Yes, dear. So Dr. Vikas, we don't say that yield strength is 0.1 to 0.2% more than the proportional limit. We say that the yield strength is that value of stress at which 0.1 to 0.2% of the total amount of plastic deformation has taken place. That is not necessary. That is usually higher than the value of proportional limit, but that does not mean that the value is exactly higher by about 0.1 to 0.2%. Right? That would vary with different materials. If a material is very soft, then you would require very less amount of force to deform it 0.1 to 0.2% of its total plastic deformation. If the material is very hard, then you would require a significant amount of force. So then your yield strength would be much higher than the proportional limit. Yeah. So I'm repeating working range and spring back once again. So, okay. That's my stress strain curve. Now, this is still my proportional limit, right? And after this, my plastic deformation starts. Now, at any given point till here, till my proportional limit, say if I apply an external force only till this point, my wire will come back to its original position. If I apply it till here, my wire will come back to its original position. If I apply it till here, my wire will come back to its original position. If I apply it till here, my wire will come back to its original position. If I apply it till the proportional limit, it will still come back to its original position. That's the maximum flexibility or the working range. Because till the proportional limit, if I deflect the wire, yes, for values less than the proportional limit, the deflection would be less, but it will be completely recovered till the proportional limit. So at the proportional limit, it's the maximum value of deflection that can be completely recovered, and that is the working range. Now, if I am to still, apply an external force to deflect it or bend it till the yield strength, will it come back to its original position? No. But will it stay totally deformed till the 0.1 to 0.2% plastic deformation? No. It will try to recover to some extent its original position. It will try to come back to its original position, but not completely recover it. And that is known as spring back. And what is the value? If you say the value of working range is proportional limit divided by the modulus of elasticity. And what is the value of spring back? Yield strength divided by the modulus of elasticity. That's a mathematical formula. More is the proportional limit, more would be the working range. Because see, for example, if there is a wire, the proportional limit is only this much. So obviously it will be its working range will be only this much, no? Versus a wire, the proportional limit is this much higher. So the working range is more. So it's directly proportional to the proportional limit as well as the yield strength, working range and spring back respectively. It is inversely proportional to the modulus of elasticity. Now, what do we mean by this? If the stiffness of the wire is less, so you basically apply less amount of force, isn't it, to kind of deflect it. Otherwise, if the wire is more stiff, you have to apply a greater amount of force. So that's like more of an ortho concept, in which for a spring you don't want to apply an excessive amount of force, because then you're also applying too much force on the PDL. Right? Just try to remember it simply and memorize this formula. Right? That working range is equal to proportional limit divided by modulus of elasticity, and spring back is yield strength divided by modulus of elasticity. Next concept in MCQ. In between, I'm actually seeing your conversation. You're writing your doubts. All right. Okay. Now, next concept is Poisson's ratio. Poisson. Writing this again. Poisson's ratio. Now, what is that? Same concept. You have a wire and you're stretching it. Right? For example, now in 3 dimensions, what do we have? We have X, Y, and Z axes. So, for example, you're stretching it along the Z axis. So, if I have this wire and I'm stretching it, there will be reduction in the cross-sectional area, isn't it? That is what is known as law of conservation of mass. You cannot stretch the wire and at the same time, you cannot fatten it. Otherwise, the same wire which was weighing 10 grams will now weigh 20 grams. That cannot happen, right? So when you're stretching the wire, it's thinning in the other two mutually perpendicular axes. Right? Based on what? Law of conservation of mass. So the first MCQ from Poisson's ratio is that it is based on the law of conservation of mass. Now, if I'm stretching it along the z-axis, it's getting compressed along the mutually two perpendicular axes, which are x and y. This ratio of compression along the x and y axes divided by the elongation along the z-axis is known as the Poisson's ratio. So, compression along the x-axis divided by elongation along the z-axis, which is the same as compression along the y-axis, and obviously the elongation along the z-axis is the same value, right? This is known as the Poisson's ratio, and this is represented by nu. This like mu is represented like this, no? It's like sigma is this and delta is this. So in your Phillips, it's represented by this mu. just for your information. When you read your textbook, you should know. What is more important is, what is the value? Two MCQs. MCQ number 1. The ideal value of the Poisson's ratio is 0.5. And what is the practical value? What is the real value? Is 0.25 to 0.3. That's the other MCQ. They can ask you either. So you should know both. Yes? So the ideal value is 0.5. The practical value is 0.25 to 0.3. Now there's another MCQ, guys. We have read the modulus of elasticity, right? Till now we've been talking about the modulus of elasticity, modulus of elasticity. What is basically the modulus of elasticity? Slope of the stress strain curve, right? Now the slope of the stress strain curve, right? This divided by this, isn't it? But this classic modulus of elasticity, when you say, it's classically under a tensile stress or tensile force. What if I apply a shear stress? Shear is what? Just like, with your blade, you sharpen your pencil. The external force is parallel to the substrate surface. That is shear stress. Similar to modulus of elasticity, which is the modulus or the stress slope of the stress strain curve under a tensile stress, if I'm applying a shear stress, there would be a shear modulus. For every kind of stress, there will be a modulus, which is nothing but the slope of the stress strain curve for that type of stress. Shear stress, tensile, compressive, flexural, so on and so forth. Right? By default, when we say modulus of elasticity, we basically normally say tensile. That is by default. Now the value of shear modulus is basically your modulus of elasticity divided by 2 multiplied by 1 plus nu. What is this? This is the Poisson's ratio. And this value is 38 upon 100, which is about 30.38. This is 0.38 multiplied by modulus of elasticity. So shear modulus is equal to 38% of modulus of elasticity. This is again mentioned in Phillips, important for your MCQ. This you have to memorize. You don't have to memorize. Do not memorize this formula. You can memorize a simple value that shear modulus is 38% of modulus of elasticity. What do you mean by this basically? If your modulus of elasticity is 100, then the shear modulus is 38. If your modulus of elasticity is 100, then your shear modulus is 38. Yes, guys? All sleeping? I'm waiting for a response in the chat box. Last is Dr. Vikas Jha, who said, okay, sir, thank you. Yes, guys. Have all of you gone to your respective mess to have dinner? I hope we are still connected. Where are all of you? Tanvi, Dr. Sunanda. Are all of you here? Yes, guys. Where is my live chat gone? Anyways, that's one problem that I keep facing. All messages. Ah, now Dr. Sunanda. So I'll do a quick revision for you. As Dr. Vikas is in his clinic. Okay, great. All right. So I'll tell you what, as far as Dr. Sunanda, if this is getting confusing, this shear modulus, my suggestion is this is simple, just memorize this. This has got not very significant basis as far as concept is concerned. Apart from the other concepts, a quick revision for you and for everyone. What we've done till now, we have been discussing simple things. We are applying an external force and we are plotting the deformation as a result of that external force. To keep on applying the force up to a certain level, the graph is a straight line portion, the slope of which is nothing but the modulus of elasticity. Till a certain level, and that level is what? Proportional limit or elastic limit. The stress is directly proportional to strain. In other words, whatever deformation that has taken place is completely recovered, and that is known as elastic deformation. Beyond that, whatever is happening in the plastic deformation zone. That means the entire deformation won't be recovered. And that is a measure of ductility. And there's a specific value of stress at which, for standardization purpose, we determine the value of stress at a given deformation, and that is 0.1. This strain would be 0.1 to 0.2% of the total plastic deformation. And this value of stress is known as the yield strength or the proof stress. Ultimately, the material is going to fracture, and that value is known as the ultimate strength. The total area under the graph is known as toughness. And this toughness is directly linked to number one, ultimate strength. More is the ultimate strength, more is the toughness, and more is the ductility, more is the toughness, because these two things will lead to a bigger graph and bigger area under it. The area under the straight line portion of this graph is known as resilience. Right? Lower is the modulus of elasticity, flatter is the curve, more is the resilience. Because if I am to compare this, see, the area of this triangle is lesser than the area of a flatter triangle. So lesser is the modulus of elasticity. Usually, more is the resilience. Right? Now I'm getting a lot of yeses. All right. Yeah. Okay. what else did I discuss? I discussed the Poisson's ratio. What is the Poisson's ratio? You have a wire, you stretch it along one axis. For example, z-axis. You can stretch it along the x-axis also. You can stretch it along the y-axis also. But by default, say I'm stretching it along the z-axis. So it is going to be compressed along the x-axis and the y-axis. So the ratio of compression along the x-axis or the y-axis divided by the stretching along the z-axis is known as the Poisson's ratio. Yes, is known as the Poisson's ratio. And this value ideally, in an ideal case scenario, is 0.5. But practically, because we're not living in an ideal world, the value is 0.25 to 0.3. And if they ask you one value, go with 0.3. One real value, 0.3. Ideal value, if they mention, is 0.5. So the range is 0.25 to 0.3. In the real world, 0.3 is one answer. And then I gave you a mathematical formula for determining the shear modulus, the details of which we don't have to derive how we got to this formula. So this is modulus of elasticity divided by 2 divided by 1 plus Poisson's ratio, which is 0.38 of modulus of elasticity. How do you write 0.38? 38 upon 100 multiplied by modulus of elasticity. What is 38 upon 100? 38% of modulus of elasticity. So shear modulus, this is for your MCQ. Shear modulus is 38% of the modulus of elasticity. This is what we've done till now. Now, a slightly tougher concept, and that is known as diametral compression test, which is used to determine one warning before, even if you don't understand, don't worry, slightly tough, but I'll try to make it very easy. I'll also tell you in simple words. Try to make it easy, right? So diametral compression test, which is used to determine the diametral tensile strength of a material. Yeah, we'll take a break. Yeah, no, we'll take a good 10 minutes break. Even I need tea. After this, I just started this, right? So we'll just, all right. Now imagine a situation in which there is a test specimen. Yeah, there is a test specimen like a a thick rod, right? And it is very brittle. What do you mean by brittle? Won't undergo plastic deformation like glass. Now normally when we do a tensile test in the lab, you basically, this is my test specimen. Imagine this is made of glass. Imagine. So when we do a tensile test, we basically clamp the two ends and we stretch it apart, right? We stretch it apart. Now what if I'm trying to determine a tensile strength of a material which is very brittle? Will I be able to clamp it? Imagine this is a glass and I clamp it. I'll crush it because it's very brittle. So I'm basically not able to hold it, right? So I'm not able to hold it, clamp it. How do I determine the tensile strength of this material? Is there any way? Yes, there is. By doing a diametral compression test. What do you mean by that? And this is my material, and instead of clamping it onto two ends and trying to stretch it apart, I'm applying a force, compressive force from the top. Now you know, and if you don't know, please understand and memorize this, that in general, all brittle materials, they're very strong in compression and are weak in tension. What do you mean by that? And if I compress this, if I sit on ice or glass, it doesn't break that easily. But if I'm trying to clamp it, then it crushes, then it breaks, right? Yes? So I apply a compressive force from the top. Now, when I apply a compressive force on the top, it will slightly expand in the, it will slightly get elongated in the mutually perpendicular axis. So if I'm, say, compressing it from the y-axis, it will slightly expand on the along the x and z axis, isn't it? Slightly try to do that. Of course, it will fracture very soon because it's brittle, but it'll do that, right? And this is known as the diametral compression test, used to determine the diametral tensile strength of brittle materials. So the MCQ is, to determine the diametral tensile strength of brittle materials, we do a diametral compression test. Yes. And if this is my test specimen, the thickness of which is, say, T, the diameter of which is, say, D, and I'm applying a force, compressive force from top, then my diametral tensile strength is 2 multiplied by the compressive force divided by pi diameter multiplied by T. Do you have to memorize this formula? No. Am I teaching something which is very advanced? No. This is in Phillips. So what question you'll get is basically an image-based question. You don't have to memorize this formula. What you'll basically get, guys, is where were we? Yeah, you will basically get an image-based question. Like this, right? Yeah. So can you please define in short alt? Yeah, I'll do that. Don't worry. Yes, so this is the image-based question. What is this? This is a diametral compression test. What does it do? It determines the diametral tensile strength of what? Of brittle materials, which cannot be held like this, clamped like this, and stretched apart because they'll fracture. So you are applying a what? You're applying a compressive force from the top, right? This material, which has a thickness of T and a diameter of D, the cylinder is getting compressed and obviously elongated in the mutually perpendicular direction, right? So this is basically, and as I said, the formula which you don't have to memorize, so forget about it. Don't have to memorize, right, guys? So you're in for a break now. Yes, so all of you, yeah. So we'll cut for a break now. Yeah. Okay, fine. But I'll give you this PDF. No, we'll provide you with this PDF. Don't worry. We keep updating our content. No, don't worry. This lecture today is customized to also the last two exams in the 2 months, previous 2 months. So that's the idea. Anyways, so are we taking a break? Yes, fine. I think 10 minutes we do need, huh? I'll review the voucher. Okay, take the